NFL is waking a sleeping giant this year, and he resides in Duval County. Welcome into this episode of Jags Now, powered by Chat Sports and presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. I am your host, Cullen Brown. We're talking about Brian Thomas Jr. today on today's episode, and I think he is going to have a hell of a 2026 season for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And if you guys agree, like this video if you believe BTJ is going to ball out this year. And if not, tell me why. I'm very curious. I know BTJ didn't have the greatest year in 2025, but in 2026, I think he is going to be an absolute stud for the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you believe in BTJ, hit that like button. All right, getting into a quote from James Gladstone here. This was back in January after the Jaguars season unfortunately came to an end against the Buffalo Bills. A lot of people were sitting there saying, hey, is Brian Thomas Jr. going to get moved? What's going to be the future of the former first-round pick? And this is what James Gladstone had to say. I think you think back to where we landed at the end of the season, where our passing attack was. We have no interest in disrupting that momentum. We look forward to continuing to build off of where we left things and know that Brian Thomas is a big piece of that puzzle, and we don't want to make sure that gets disrupted at any time. And I think the very key phrasing from that quote is a big piece to that puzzle. Like that to me signaled the fact that, okay, Brian Thomas Jr., he's going to stay in Jacksonville, barring some like just outrageous offer from a team, that was willing to overpay for BTJ's services. The Jaguars were never interested in moving on from him. And, I think that should have been the end of the conversation, but we know how NFL offseason rolls around. Rumors get flying all over the place, and BTJ was the subject to a lot of rumors. But if you don't believe that James Gladstone was the only one that backed BTJ, this is what Liam Coen had to say at that same press conference about Brian Thomas Jr. When you are part of a team that wins, the wealth will be shared. It will never truly be about one player. And I will continue to pour into these guys. BT, Brian Thomas, will 100% be a part of that. And Coen was right, is very smart to take a committee approach in terms of like, hey, it's a collective issue here. Like the offense, yeah, it wasn't the greatest in terms of overall how we finished it and where we want to be, but it's not all on Brian Thomas Jr., right? And I think that people were sitting there and misconstruing the fact that, okay, Brian Thomas Jr. was going to be somebody that, Liam Coen just didn't fit in well. Like there was rumors, they could maybe potentially look on to move on from BTJ. There were just so many different reasons, at least in my opinion, why Brian Thomas Jr. wasn't going to get traded, but also didn't get traded. For one, he's still very young in terms of NFL and also just in the fact of life. Like he's 23 years old. He turns 24 in October. He has, at minimum, 2 years left on his rookie deal. Why is that important? Well, A, you can also pick up his fifth-year option if the Jaguars so choose to make it 3 years left on his rookie deal. And two, whenever you have a player on a rookie skill level contract, they're hardly not paying him anything, especially for the output that he gave you not only last season, which he didn't perform great, but especially that rookie year form that Jaguars fans, were really hyped about for Brian Thomas Jr. That also, and this just goes for every team, teams don't generally love to give up on first rounders. I understand that wasn't from the Liam Coen regime, so to speak, but they still wanted to see how much of a football player they can get out of Brian Thomas Jr., and they still believe in the talent as, point four kind of lands on. Like, it would have to take a monumental, BTJ would have had to have, I think, even a worse year than he did last year, and then maybe there was, some off-the-field issues or whatever the case may be, for them to even consider moving off of Brian Thomas Jr., based on his, performance from last season. And that was never the case. That's not even existing, right? And he was just never getting traded this offseason, guys. I don't know how else to say it. Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy that did not have a great year in 2025. We can all admit that. But to act like and sit there and say, he just doesn't fit in Liam Cohen's offense, there's just no way that there's a future for Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville. He needs a new situation. He needs a new program. If you listen to how Liam Coen and James Gladstone spoke about the former LSU Tiger, that was never the case. He was always staying in Jacksonville. And coming up on the second half of today's show, I'm going to talk about, some reasons why the NFL should be scared of Brian Thomas Jr. and what he could be for the Jaguars in 2026. But before we get into that, we need to hear from a word from our sponsor over at Prize Picks. Before we continue with today's show, I want to show you my projection of the day from Prize Picks. And it's none other than Victor Wembanyama. And I'm taking the more on his 27.5 points. You might be sitting there saying, Cullen, he hasn't hit 27.5 points in 3 of his last 5 matchups. Why are you taking the more? Well, if you look closely, those mores that Victor Wembanyama's hit have come after losses. What happened in game one? He did not get the win. So I'm rolling with the more on Victor Wembanyama's points at 27.5. And he is included in the little flex player lineup, a 6-player flex lineup, $5 to win $85 here on Prize Picks. Give me the more on Devin Vassell's rebounds and assists, more on Dylan Harper's 20.5 points, rebounds, and assists. I feel like the rookie's going to ball out. More than Karl Anthony Towns' 14.5 points, more than OG Anunoby's 10.5 points, more than Stephon Castle's 5.5 rebounds. And I already told you that I'm taking the more with Victor Wembanyama. Life's too short to take the less in my book. And speaking of flex lineups, valid for today only. Protected plays are back. Win your flex lineup or you get your net loss back in bonus lineups. Just make sure you visit the promos tab in the Prize Picks app. A new user offer, guys. Download the Prize Picks app today with the link in the comments in the description and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, reason number one why the NFL should be scared of Brian Thomas Jr. Because, again, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in terms of like, oh, could he get traded? Oh, could he get moved on from him? I mean, what's the future of Brian Thomas Jr.? Sophomore slump, or is this just who's going to be from now on? Well, if you listen to Liam Coen, not only just from the first part of today's show, but also just how he's spoken about Brian Thomas Jr. the second OTAs have started, he's got his support. He's got his guys back. This is what Liam Coen had to say recently about Brian Thomas Jr. We're being a little bit more intentional about usage and chemistry with him this spring and trying to get a true connection we didn't quite have last spring or last training camp. I've been very pleased with how he's taken the things that we asked him to do to get better at and be intentional about those reps. And you want a player to be coachable, and you want to sit there and Coen acknowledge, right? Like, we didn't get off to the best start in the relationship when Liam Cohen's first year as the Jaguars head coach and with Brian Thomas Jr., which ultimately led to 2025 not being ideal for BTJ and what the Jaguars wanted it for. But this has been the Jaguars' approach all offseason long, right? Is to support Brian Thomas Jr., believe in him, build back up his confidence, and really invest in him and say, we still believe in Brian Thomas Jr. We think he could absolutely be a big part of our offense. But it's not enough just for the coach to say, hey, we've got your back and support. That's not the only reason that the NFL should be scared. The real crux of this, the real reason why I think the NFL should be scared of Brian Thomas Jr. and this Jaguars offense is a new offensive philosophy that we talked about on a previous episode here on Jags Now, but the Jags are slightly tweaking how they kind of approach their offensive, just kind of overall mindset in 2026. This is what Liam Coen had to say, and I just want to bring this quote back up in case you missed it on last week's episode. What are the areas in which he's really doing at a high level that we can continue to lean into for the rest of this season? This is also talking about Brian Thomas Jr. What were those things that are on the shelf for the end of the season that we need to attack right now? One of those, getting the ball down the field a little bit more with throwing the ball post, pushing the ball downfield a little bit more. And so the Jaguars, they kind of acknowledged, right? Like, they wanted to have more of an explosive offense here in 2026. And it's an evolution that all smart coaches love to take in terms of just trying to change things up, keep teams on their toes. But when you can get those kind of easy touchdowns, those 50, 60, 70-yard bombs, it just takes so much pressure off your offense and really puts the defense in more favorable situations. And he talked about it, right? Having more of those explosive plays, running more of those goes, those explosive posts, those corners, whatever the case may be. Well, you know how you take the top off the defense? You have explosive playmakers. You know who's an explosive playmaker for the Jacksonville Jaguars? Yeah, it's Brian Thomas Jr. You can look at his RAS score that we just had on screen back when he was at LSU. Legitimate 4.3 guy. He has the explosive measurables, had a 9.97 RAS score. Like, he is an athlete, if nothing else, that's also a damn good wide receiver. And credit to Dan D. Griffiths on Twitter, who had this kind of graphic made by Fantasy Points and some other website to kind of chart Brian Thomas Jr.'s route tree percentage from his first 2 years in the National Football League. And one number and one kind of route really stands out. Whether he had a good year in 2024 or a down year in 2025, what is the route that Brian Thomas Jr. loves to run? Go routes. 17.3% in 2024, 25% in 2025. You can also see the rest of the stats that Brian Thomas Jr. ran throughout his career. And I just think that Brian Thomas Jr. is a perfect fit for this offensive philosophy that Liam Coen is trying to establish. And so far in camp, based on everything we've heard, it sounds like him and Trevor Lawrence are really connecting, which brings us to our kind of final point. Trevor Lawrence's ascension, right? Now, as a wide receiver in the National Football League, you are somewhat, I don't want to say limited, but you are kind of in this kind of place where, depending on your quarterback play, you can only do so much, right? Like, if your quarterback, for whatever reason, is just kind of a journeyman starter, or, just a low level guy that really isn't moving the chains consistently, you're not going to do or have as much impact as a guy that, is at the top of the league in terms of, being able to consistently make throws in the National Football League. Trevor Lawrence, for whatever reason, throughout his entire NFL career, just hasn't quite lived up to being that former number one overall pick. But then Liam Coen came around. In the first 9 games of last year, he wasn't hitting quite all of his strides. The offense was kind of clunky. Again, Brian Thomas Jr. has his part in that, but it really started to click those last 8 games of the season. And it was shortly after the Jaguars made the trade for Jacoby Myers. And it really seemed to settle things down, and Trevor Lawrence really got into a rhythm. I mean, you see the stats on the screen. Across the board, he got better. Completion percentage, pass yards per game, touchdown to interception ratio, QB rating, yards per attempt. Like, all of his numbers are up. And I only expect those numbers, to continue to grow. And one thing that has been very apparent, if you've been paying attention to OTAs at any level, one of 2 things is very true. A, Parker Washington is still a stud and is only going to make things easier on Brian Thomas Jr., but also T-Law and BTJ, their chemistry is humming. John Shipley, who does a great job of covering the Jaguars for Sports Illustrated, had this kind of blurb on Trevor Lawrence and BTJ that I wanted to share with you guys. Through a pair of open OTA sessions, Thomas has been the most explosive playmaker. That's that word again, explosive, on the offense, and it is obvious the Jaguars have made an effort to get him and Trevor Lawrence on the same page when it comes to testing defenses vertically. Thomas has now caught multiple deep passes and has done so over each of the Jaguars' top 3 healthy cornerbacks at this rate. Obviously, alluding to the fact that Travis Hunter hasn't been out there yet. We'll see what it ultimately looks like when Travis Hunter gets out there. But if these 2 guys that you see on your screen right now can stay on the same page, look out. I've kind of said it multiple times throughout the offseason and my time here as the Jags Now host. I do believe that Parker Washington, will be this team's wide receiver 1. I think that just based on the momentum that he had off the end of the year and when the Jaguars were truly at their peak, he was the focal point of the offense. But if you give Brian Thomas Jr. as just another, hey, we're locked in, we can trust this guy on a weekly basis, his potential, it's second to none on this roster in terms of the receiving core. And I love Parker Washington. I love Jacoby Myers as much as the next guy. BTJ is built different. I mean, he is an athlete that if he hits his true, prime and hits his true potential as a former first-round pick that can really make things a difference and get back to that rookie year BTJ, this is going to be a problem for NFL defenses. And I just can't wait to see as we get further along into the offseason, get into training camp, get into the preseason action, and then finally when football is officially back, what these 2 look like as a dynamic duo. I want to hear from you guys, though. Do you believe in Brian Thomas Jr.? A simple Y for yes or a simple N for no. I think he is bouncing back as a wide receiver that is a force to be reckoned with in this league. I'm spamming my Ys down below in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think. And thank you guys so much for tuning in this episode of Jags Now, presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. For their all things Jaguars coverage, news, rumors, what have you, hit that subscribe button to never miss a beat. And until next time, guys, peace out.